My journey to becoming the new police chief didn't start with a single moment. It wasn't about one act of courage or a single badge pinned to my chest. It started long before I ever stepped foot into a courtroom, long before I ever crossed paths with Detective Robert Hayes. It began in a neighborhood where the police were more feared than respected, and where black women were hardly seen as authority figures, let alone leaders. Before we continue, please subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening. Your support means everything. I wasn't born into a world of privilege. My parents, both immigrants, struggled to make ends meet, but they taught me the value of hard work, discipline, and the belief that I could be anything I set my mind to. While other kids in my community talked about becoming doctors or lawyers, I dreamed of being a police officer. Not because I thought it would be glamorous or easy. Quite the opposite. I wanted to be part of the change that my community desperately needed. I wanted to show the world that a woman, especially a black woman, could stand strong and make a difference in spaces that had long been closed off to us. When I applied to the police academy, I had no illusions about the obstacles I would face. I knew it wouldn't be easy. The academy was predominantly white, with only a handful of black students and even fewer black women. I remember the first day, walking into the training room, feeling all eyes on me, some curious, some judgmental, and some dismissive. But I wasn't here to make friends. I was here to prove something, not just to them, but to myself. The first few weeks were brutal. The physical tests were grueling, and the mental strain was just as hard. But the hardest part of it all was the sense of isolation. There were moments when I was sure I wouldn't make it, when I felt the weight of centuries of racial discrimination pressing down on me. I'd be the only black woman in class, and when I spoke up, I could feel the room tighten, as if my very presence was somehow a disruption. There were countless moments when I was subjected to microaggressions, or worse, outright racism. One of the instructors, Officer Thompson, once told me that maybe a desk job would be better suited for someone like me, implying that I wasn't cut out for field work. His comment stung, but it only fueled my determination. I didn't back down. I worked harder, stayed later, and proved myself over and over again. Eventually, my persistence paid off. I graduated at the top of my class. The moment I walked across that stage, I knew this was only the beginning. The real challenge lay ahead. But the academy had prepared me for that challenge. It had sharpened my resolve, taught me how to stand my ground, and made me believe that I could thrive in an environment that wasn't always welcoming to people like me. After the academy, I was assigned to a precinct in the city, an area notorious for its high crime rates and the strained relationship between the community and the police. It was a place where officers were expected to show toughness, even if it meant turning a blind eye to the injustices happening right under their noses. But I wasn't about to be another officer who stood by and did nothing. I made it my mission to build trust with the community, to show them that there were officers who cared about them, not just their statistics. In the early years, I was faced with the same challenges I'd encountered at the academy. I had to constantly prove myself. I could hear the whispers behind my back, see the skeptical glances, feel the weight of people questioning my authority simply because of my gender and my race. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I wanted to be more than just an officer. I wanted to be a leader. Slowly, I earned respect not through words, but through actions. I took on difficult assignments, worked long hours, and showed my colleagues that I was capable of handling the most dangerous situations. And while there were still those who doubted me, I built a network of allies within the department, officers who recognized my commitment and dedication to the job. But there was one officer who never seemed to share that respect: Detective Robert Hayes. From the very beginning, Hayes made it clear that he didn't think women belonged in law enforcement, especially black women. He was a senior officer with a reputation for being arrogant, dismissive, and more often than not, downright racist. He had a long history of making inappropriate comments, both in and out of the precinct, and no one had ever held him accountable for it. The department had turned a blind eye to his behavior for years, but I couldn't. I remember the first time he crossed the line with me. We were in the locker room, and I had just finished my shift. I was about to change into my civilian clothes when I overheard Hayes talking to another officer. He didn't think I could hear him, but his voice was loud enough for anyone in the vicinity to catch. "Women like her," he said, his voice dripping with disdain. "They don't have the toughness for this job. She's just here to fill a quota. You wait, she won't last." I was furious. I hadn't earned my place through some diversity initiative or affirmative action. I had earned it through sweat, grit, and sheer determination. I wanted to confront him right there, but I knew it wasn't the time. Instead, I reported the comment to my supervisor, who promised to handle it. But nothing changed. Hayes continued to act with impunity, and the department continued to sweep his behavior under the rug. I had no choice but to push forward, knowing that the department was just as complicit in his actions as he was. But it wasn't just about me. It was about every officer who had been silenced, every person who had been hurt by his behavior. And so, I made the decision. I was going to take him down not just for me, but for everyone who had ever been victimized by his racism and bigotry. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I was prepared. I had the evidence, and I was determined to make sure he faced the consequences of his actions. The day I filed the report against him was the day my life began to change in ways I never could have imagined. Filing the report against Hayes was the hardest thing I'd ever done in my career. It wasn't just about confronting one officer, it was about confronting an entire system that allowed his behavior to flourish unchecked. It was about the years of silence, the countless victims who had been ignored, and the way the department had failed to address the deeper, more systemic issues of racism and discrimination. But I wasn't going to let that stop me. I was going to do everything in my power to make sure Hayes paid for his actions. I couldn't allow him to continue hurting people, especially not in a job where lives were at stake. The case was strong, the evidence irrefutable. All I had to do was follow through. I never imagined, though, that the fight would take me to the very place I had feared, the courtroom. And I never expected that the confrontation would be so public, so raw. But that's where it all began, the moment I stepped into that courtroom, ready to face Hayes and the system that had enabled him. Not knowing that my entire life was about to change forever, the courtroom was a place of cold formality. Yet I could feel the heat of tension rising with every word spoken. The walls felt as if they were closing in, amplifying every detail. The weight of the silence, the flickering of the overhead lights, the soft rustle of papers. It wasn't just a legal battle anymore. It had become something deeply personal, a reckoning that had been long overdue. The judge, an older man with a stern face and glasses perched low on his nose, called the court to order. I stood at the witness stand, the same place I had been just a few short years ago as a rookie officer. Now, it was me on the other side of the desk, speaking truth, fighting for justice not just for myself but for every officer who had been silenced. For every officer who had been pushed to the margins because of people like Hayes. Detective Hayes was seated across from me, looking smug as if this were just another day in his life. He was too comfortable, too sure of himself. I could see it in the way he slouched in his chair, his arms crossed in front of him, a faint sneer tugging at his lips. He didn't even seem to care that his actions were under scrutiny. He had done this before he knew how to work the system, how to skirt consequences, how to play the game. But this time, I wasn't going to let him get away with it. My lawyer had done his job well, laying out the evidence clearly and methodically. The incidents I'd reported, Hayes' racist comments, his mistreatment of black officers, the way he wielded his power to intimidate and belittle were all there in black and white. But it wasn't just the words that mattered. It was the pattern of behavior, the way it had poisoned the department for years. The question was no longer just about me. It was about accountability, about the future of a department that had allowed such a man to remain unchecked for so long. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me. Some were sympathetic, others skeptical, but none were as piercing as Hayes' gaze. His eyes locked onto mine, and for a moment, I saw something there. It wasn't just disdain, it was fear. He could see the storm coming, and he knew he wasn't prepared for it, but he didn't show it. Instead, he leaned back, a casual smile curling on his lips. As if to taunt me, "Officer," Hayes began, his voice dripping with condescension. "If I had known you'd be making a scene like this, I would have made sure to bring popcorn." The courtroom erupted in low murmurs. I could feel the anger rising in me, but I didn't let it show. I had learned long ago that responding in kind would only make him feel more powerful. This wasn't a game for him to win. This was my chance to make him see the world differently. And I wasn't going to waste it. "I'm not here to entertain you, detective," I replied, my voice cold and firm. "I'm here because your actions have consequences. And I won't let you walk away from this." The judge banged his gavel, silencing the room. "Detective Hayes," the judge said, his voice low but commanding, "this is a courtroom, not a circus. Please refrain from making any more comments." I could see Hayes' jaw tighten. He hadn't expected my response, and for the first time he looked less confident. But he wasn't done. He wasn't going to go down without a fight. "Fine," Hayes muttered under his breath. "But I'll remind you, officer, that it's easy to throw accusations when you're hiding behind your badge." The room held its breath. It was the perfect opportunity to attack him, to make him look like the arrogant, bitter man he was. But I stayed quiet. I had already laid the groundwork. Now it was time for the truth to speak for itself. I took a deep breath. Steadying myself before I spoke, "Detective Hayes," I said, my voice louder this time, cutting through the tension. "You've made it your life's work to tear people down, especially those who don't look like you. You've used your position of power to create a toxic environment, and I'm not the only one who's suffered because of it. But today, that ends." The courtroom was silent. I could feel the weight of every word, and I knew this was the moment that would change everything. It was a strange, almost surreal feeling, like time had stopped. I was standing there, my words hanging in the air, when I saw Hayes stand up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. He moved quickly, his body language aggressive, as if he were trying to assert his dominance one last time. Without warning, I felt the sharp pain shoot through my leg. Hayes had kicked me. First, it was disbelief. The shock of it paralyzed me. I looked down at my leg, where the blow had landed. Then, everything clicked. This wasn't just a physical attack. It was the culmination of years of disdain, years of oppressive actions aimed at keeping me in my place. The room gasped in shock. I could hear people whispering, some crying out in anger, others in disbelief. I felt the burning rage welling up inside me, but I didn't let it consume me. This was his last mistake. I looked at him. His eyes were wide with panic now, but he tried to cover it up with a smug grin. "You think I care about your little lawsuit?" Hayes spat. "You're nothing." But I wasn't listening to him anymore. I was thinking ahead about how I would take him down, how I would make sure that his actions had consequences. It wasn't about just this moment. It was about everything he represented, the very thing I had been fighting against. I stood tall, refusing to let him see the anger that was simmering beneath the surface. I wasn't going to let him get away with this, not when I had come so far. The room fell into an awkward silence as I met his gaze. "I think it's time you learned something, Detective," I said, my voice steady, cold. "You're not in control here anymore." The moment hung in the air, but I wasn't finished yet. The truth had to come out. The courtroom was silent, waiting for me to speak. "I'm the new police chief," I said, my words resonating through the room. "Effective immediately. I'm the one who will be leading this department, and I won't stand for any more of your behavior." His face drained of color. I could see the realization hit him like a tidal wave. The smug arrogance that had once defined him was gone, replaced by an unmistakable fear. It was too late for him to backpedal. The damage had been done, and now I was the one in charge. For the first time in his life, Detective Robert Hayes was powerless. The man who had tormented so many for years was now facing the consequences of his own actions. The room erupted. The murmurings, the gasps, the disbelief, it was all part of the spectacle. But it wasn't just a spectacle for Hayes. It was for everyone in that room, everyone who had ever been made to feel small, who had ever been oppressed by those in power. It was a reminder that the system could be shaken, that it was possible to rise above, no matter how high the obstacles stacked against you. Hayes didn't speak again. He couldn't. He sat there, defeated, as I turned back to my lawyer. It wasn't over, but it was the beginning of the end for him, and as for me, this was just the start. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, the weight of the moment sinking in. The silence in the courtroom was deafening. Hayes, once so confident and smug, was now reduced to a trembling figure slumped in his chair. His arrogance had crumbled in front of everyone, and for the first time, I saw him for what he truly was, a man who believed he was untouchable, but who had just been shown the reality of accountability. The judge looked between Hayes and me, clearly taken aback by the sudden shift in the room. He cleared his throat, trying to regain control of the situation. "Detective Hayes," the judge began, his voice cold but firm. "I'm not sure if you fully comprehend the gravity of your actions here today." Hayes muttered something under his breath, an attempt at justification, "I'm sure." But the judge wasn't having it. "You've crossed a line in this courtroom, and I'll be reviewing your conduct with the highest authorities." The courtroom buzzed with whispers, but it was all a blur to me. My mind was racing, and my heart pounded in my chest. I had never imagined this day would come so soon, that I would be standing here, revealing my new role as the police chief. facing down the very man who had tried to hold me back. The judge called for a short recess, but as the room emptied out, I felt the weight of the moment. The shock was settling in. I had taken down a man who had thought he was invincible, and it felt like the first victory in what would be a long, hard fight to change the culture within the department. Outside the courtroom, the reporters were already gathering, their cameras flashing as they tried to capture every moment of the chaos that had unfolded. I could hear the chatter, the questions, the gasps of disbelief, but none of it mattered. None of it could take away what had just happened. I had exposed Hayes for who he truly was, and I had shown everyone that I was no longer going to sit quietly and allow racism to fester unchecked in our department. I made my way out of the courtroom, flanked by my lawyer, who was already receiving calls from the media. I didn't stop to answer any questions. Instead, I walked straight to the elevator, feeling the eyes of the world on me. But it wasn't fear that fueled my steps, it was determination. When I reached my office, I took a moment to collect myself. I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and stared out of the window, reflecting on everything that had led to this point. The years of hard work, the endless nights of doubt, the obstacles, the racism, the misogyny, it had all led me to this moment. But it wasn't over. Not by a long shot. I knew the battle had just begun. Hayes' actions weren't isolated. They were part of a larger system that allowed officers like him to act with impunity. But now, that system was facing a reckoning. I was the one who would make sure that things changed. The media coverage that followed was relentless. Every outlet from local news stations to national media picked up the story. The headlines read something like this: New police chief reveals herself in court after kicking incident with racist detective. But what struck me the most wasn't the media attention, it was the messages that flooded in. People from all walks of life reached out, offering support, thanking me for standing up to someone who had long been above reproach. It wasn't just black officers who sent their words of encouragement, but officers of all races, many of whom had witnessed the toxic culture Hayes had fostered, but had been too afraid to speak out. One message, in particular, stood out to me. It was from a young officer, a black woman, who had recently joined the force. Her message was simple: I never thought I'd see someone like me in this position. You've given me hope. I want to be like you one day. That message, more than any headline or news story, made it all worth it. I knew that the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was moments like these that reminded me of why I'd fought so hard. I wasn't just fighting for myself, I was fighting for every person who felt like they didn't belong, who had been told they weren't enough, who had been made to feel invisible in this world. The following day, I received a call from the department's Internal Affairs Division. Hayes was requesting a meeting. I had no interest in speaking with him, but I knew it was a necessary step. He had to face the consequences of his actions, and this meeting would give me the opportunity to put an end to his career once and for all. I walked into the conference room where Hayes was waiting. He looked different, smaller somehow. The arrogance had been replaced with a palpable sense of fear. He was no longer the man who had walked into that courtroom with so much swagger. Now he was just a man who had been exposed. You wanted to speak with me? I asked, my tone icy. I wasn't here for apologies. I was here for justice. He shifted uncomfortably in his chair before finally speaking. I just wanted to apologize. I never meant for it to go this far. Weeks passed, and the department began to shift slowly at first, like the first cracks in a dam. It wasn't just about firing Hayes or implementing new policies. It was about setting a precedent that no officer, no matter their rank, could act with impunity. Every day, I walked through the precinct with a newfound purpose. I wasn't just doing the job, I was reshaping it, brick by brick. The tension between the old guard and the new was palpable. Some officers resisted the changes, whispering behind my back, questioning my authority, or muttering about political correctness. They didn't understand yet that I wasn't asking for a change in the name of political correctness. I was asking for respect. Respect for each other. Respect for our community. Respect for the badge we wore. But for every grumble, there were more supporters. Officers who had felt silenced for years, officers of color, women officers, and those who simply believed in doing the right thing. They rallied behind me. Slowly but surely, I started to see the effects of the culture shift. People began to speak up, to challenge old systems of inequality, to demand better training, better treatment, and most importantly, Accountability. The first real test came when I initiated a department-wide review of all officer misconduct cases, including those that had been dismissed or swept under the rug. Hayes' name came up again. His past actions, the allegations, the complaints from those who had worked under him, they were all there, a long, dark trail of unchecked behavior. I had promised to make sure he faced the consequences, and I was going to make good on that promise. Hayes was officially forced into early retirement. His career, once so full of promise and arrogance, had ended in disgrace. But it wasn't just his retirement that caught the department off guard, it was the ripple effect. I made sure that his record reflected every accusation against him. From his discriminatory actions to the way he had handled his cases, the media picked up the story again, reporting that Hayes had been forced out after an internal investigation found numerous cases of misconduct. His once gilded reputation crumbled under the weight of his own actions. It was a victory, but it wasn't sweet. It was necessary. It was justice, but that wasn't the most satisfying part of it all. No, the real twist came when Hayes tried to make a comeback, albeit in a different form. He had the nerve to apply for a civilian position with another department, as if he could start over and continue his career. That's when I stepped in. I personally sent a letter to the new department, detailing his history, the reasons for his early retirement, and the unacceptable behavior that led to his downfall. He had underestimated me. His arrogance had blinded him to the reality of the situation. He wasn't going to be allowed to quietly move on. Hayes would never work in law enforcement again. The satisfaction that came from knowing I had removed someone like him from the equation was immense. But what was even more gratifying was how I saw the department react. They knew I had stood up for what was right, not just for me, but for all of us. They saw the power of accountability in action. With Hayes gone, I focused on rebuilding trust not just between the officers and the community, but within the department itself. It wasn't enough to remove one bad apple. The culture had to change. The old ways had to be eradicated. I implemented a mandatory bias and diversity training program for every officer, from rookies to veterans. It wasn't a quick fix. Change never is. But the conversation started happening. Officers began questioning their own biases, their own prejudices. We set up anonymous reporting systems for misconduct, ensuring that officers no longer had to fear retaliation if they reported something they knew was wrong. I also reached out to the community, opening up new avenues for dialogue and cooperation. It wasn't just about putting officers on patrol, it was about fostering relationships with the people we served. I wanted them to feel safe, not just physically, but emotionally safe. I wanted them to trust us again. It was going to take time, but it was worth it. One night, weeks after Hayes had been removed, and the department was beginning to feel like it was on the right track, I sat in my office, staring out the window. The sun had set, and the city lights twinkled below me. The streets, once filled with tension and distrust, now felt different. I had changed something fundamental, something deep within the heart of the police force. I had proven that one person, one officer, could make a difference, but the cost had been high. I thought about the toll it had taken on me, on my relationships, on my health, on my mental well-being. The sleepless nights, the constant weight of being in a leadership position where every decision felt like it had the power to make or break not just my career, but the future of the department. I had lost friendships, faced isolation, and carried a burden that many would never understand. But there were moments, small moments, when I saw officers step up, when I saw the community start to trust us again, and it made it all worth it. A few months later, I stood in front of a crowd, police officers, local leaders, and community members all gathered for a ceremony. It was a ceremony to mark the beginning of a new chapter for the department. As I took the podium, I looked out at the faces of the men and women who had stood beside me, who had fought for this change with me. It wasn't just about the policies or the programs. It was about the people. It was about creating an environment where we could all thrive, regardless of our race, our gender, or our background. Today, I said, my voice carrying across the room, we celebrate not just the victories we've won, but the work that lies ahead. We celebrate the change that has already started, but we also acknowledge that we have a long road ahead of us. This department will be a place where everyone is treated with respect. It will be a place where the law is applied equally, where we hold ourselves accountable to the communities we serve. The room erupted in applause, but it wasn't just applause for me, it was for everyone who had believed in this change. who had fought for it, who had pushed through the tough times to get here. As I left the podium, I looked around the room, and for the first time, I felt a sense of peace. The fight wasn't over, but we had made progress, real, tangible progress. And I knew that this was only the beginning.